Let me start with something that rarely gets said out loud. Emotional exhaustion doesn't always look like breaking down or crying in the dark. Sometimes it looks like getting up every day, doing what needs to be done, answering messages, showing up to work, smiling at the right moments, and still feeling strangely empty inside. It looks like functioning. It looks like being responsible. It looks like being fine. The emotionally exhausted adult is not dramatic. They are not loud about their pain. In fact, they're often the most dependable person in the room, the one who keeps things moving, the one who doesn't complain, the one others rely on. And that's exactly how the exhaustion begins. It usually starts quietly. There is no clear moment where someone says, "I am now emotionally exhausted." Instead, it creeps in slowly, a little less patience than before, a little less excitement about things that once mattered, a strange heaviness when waking up, even after a full night of sleep. What makes emotional exhaustion so confusing is that life on the outside may look completely fine. There may be a job, responsibilities, routines, even achievements. But inside there is a deep tiredness that rest doesn't seem to touch. This kind of exhaustion is not about the body. It is about the mind carrying too much for too long. Emotionally exhausted adults often learned early that their feelings were something to manage, suppress, or put aside. Maybe they grew up in environments where being strong was rewarded, but being vulnerable was inconvenient. Maybe they had to grow up quickly. Maybe they became the mature one, the listener, the fixer, the peacemaker. Over time they learned a dangerous lesson without realizing it, that their worth came from what they could handle. So they handled everything. They handled pressure. They handled disappointment. They handled other people's emotions. They handled responsibility that wasn't theirs. And because they handled it well, nobody thought to ask if it was costing them something. Emotional exhaustion often develops in people who are deeply empathetic, people who feel things intensely but learn to hide it, people who care even when caring hurts, people who notice shifts in tone, changes in mood, unspoken tension in rooms. When you are wired this way, the world is loud. Every interaction takes energy. Every relationship requires emotional labor. And when there is no space to unload that weight, it starts to pile up. At some point, the nervous system gets tired of being alert all the time. This is where numbness often enters the picture. Not because the person doesn't care, but because caring without rest is unsustainable. The mind trying to protect itself starts turning the volume down on emotions. Joy feels muted, sadness feels distant, even anger loses its sharpness. Many emotionally exhausted adults describe this as feeling flat or hollow. They're not deeply unhappy, but they're not truly alive either. Life feels like something they are managing, not experiencing. This numbness is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like laziness, detachment, or lack of ambition. From the inside, it feels like walking through life with a constant low battery warning. Another common sign is irritability over small things. When emotional reserves are depleted, the nervous system becomes sensitive. Minor inconveniences feel overwhelming. Small interruptions feel intrusive, not because the person is unreasonable, but because there is no emotional buffer left. When you've been holding yourself together for a long time, even tiny cracks feel threatening. Emotionally exhausted adults often feel guilty about this. They wonder why they can't just be grateful, why they can't enjoy what they have, why they feel overwhelmed when others seem to manage fine. What they don't realize is that they are comparing their inner load to someone else's outer behavior. Everyone carries different invisible weights. Another layer of emotional exhaustion comes from unexpressed emotions. Feelings that were never fully processed don't disappear. They settle into the body. They show up as tension, restlessness, shallow breathing, chronic fatigue, or a constant sense of unease. When adults don't feel safe expressing their emotions, they learn to intellectualize them instead. They explain how they feel rather than actually feeling it. They analyze instead of release. Over time, this creates distance from their own inner world. They become good at understanding emotions, but not experiencing relief from them. This is why emotionally exhausted adults often feel disconnected from themselves. They know what they should feel. They remember what they used to feel, but accessing it feels difficult, like trying to recall a song that's just out of reach. Relationships can become complicated during this phase. Emotionally exhausted adults still care deeply about others, but they struggle to show up the way they used to. Conversations feel draining. Social interactions feel like tasks. Even people they love can feel overwhelming. This creates a painful inner conflict. They want connection, but they don't have the energy for it. They crave closeness, but they also crave solitude. So they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they are tired of giving more than they have. Unfortunately, withdrawal often leads to misunderstanding. Others may interpret it as disinterest or emotional distance. This can reinforce the exhausted adult's belief that they are failing somehow, which only deepens the exhaustion. There is also a quiet grief that comes with emotional exhaustion. Grief for the version of themselves who felt lighter. Grief for the excitement they once had. Grief for the ease with which they used to connect. They may not consciously think about this grief, but it shows up as a sense of loss without a clear object. This grief is rarely acknowledged because it doesn't come from one specific event. It comes from accumulation from years of small sacrifices, unspoken compromises, and emotional self-denial. Another important aspect of emotional exhaustion is how it affects identity. Many emotionally exhausted adults define themselves by what they do for others. When their energy runs low, they don't just feel tired, they feel useless. If they can't give, support, or perform at the same level, they question their value. This creates a cycle where rest feels uncomfortable. Slowing down feels like failure. Doing less feels like being less. So even when they are exhausted, they keep pushing. They tell themselves things will get better after this deadline, after this responsibility, after this phase of life. But there is always something else waiting. Emotionally exhausted adults are often high-functioning. That's what makes their struggles so invisible. They show up, they get things done, they meet expectations, but inside they are running on borrowed energy. Over time, this disconnect between external functioning and internal depletion becomes harder to maintain. Motivation fades, concentration drops, small decisions feel heavy. Even things that once brought meaning feel distant. This is not because the person has lost their purpose, it's because their emotional system is asking for care. The mind and body can only suppress signals for so long. At its core, emotional exhaustion is a message. A quiet one at first, but persistent. It says something needs attention, something has been ignored for too long. Not necessarily a dramatic change, not quitting everything or starting over, but an honest reckoning with emotional limits. One of the hardest truths for emotionally exhausted adults to accept is that being strong does not mean being endless. Strength without recovery turns into depletion. Another difficult truth is that not everything needs to be carried alone. But for people who learned early to rely on themselves, this feels unnatural. Asking for help feels like burdening others. Rest feels undeserved. So they keep going even when their inner world is asking them to pause. Emotional exhaustion doesn't mean someone is broken. It means they have been surviving for a long time without enough emotional nourishment. And the first step toward healing is not fixing, optimizing, or pushing harder. It is noticing. Noticing the fatigue beneath the productivity. Noticing the numbness beneath the calm. Noticing the sadness beneath the strength. Because awareness is where reconnection begins. And reconnection is what the emotionally exhausted adult has been missing most. This is not the end of the story. It is the point where understanding deepens, and where something important begins to shift. The nervous system doesn't just need an activity, it needs safety. For many emotionally exhausted adults, safety has been missing for a long time. Not physical safety, but emotional safety. The kind that allows someone to say how they feel without consequences. The kind that allows mistakes without shame. The kind that allows rest without guilt. When a person grows up learning that love, approval, or stability is conditional, their nervous system stays alert even in calm moments. Relaxation feels unfamiliar, silence feels suspicious, doing nothing feels wrong. So even when life slows down, the mind keeps scanning for problems. This is why emotionally exhausted adults often struggle to be present. Their thoughts jump ahead. Their minds replay conversations. They anticipate needs. They plan for outcomes that may never happen. This constant mental activity is exhausting, even when the body is still. Another overlooked part of emotional exhaustion is self-abandonment. Over time, emotionally exhausted adults become experts at overriding their own needs. Hunger, emotional discomfort, overwhelm, boredom, sadness, all get pushed aside in favor of what must be done. At first, this feels responsible, mature even, but slowly it creates a split between who they are and what they allow themselves to feel. They stop checking in with themselves because they already know the answer will be inconvenient. This is how people lose touch with their inner signals. They don't know when they're tired until they're depleted. They don't know when they hurt until resentment builds. They don't know what they want because they've been focused on what's required. Emotional exhaustion thrives in this disconnection. Many emotionally exhausted adults describe feeling like they're living life from the outside, like they're watching themselves move through routines. They're present, but not fully there. This dissociation is subtle. It doesn't feel extreme, it feels normal because it developed gradually. And because it feels normal, it's rarely questioned. Another factor that deepens emotional exhaustion is the pressure to be emotionally intelligent all the time. Emotionally exhausted adults are often self-aware. They understand their patterns, they can explain their feelings, they know why they react the way they do. But understanding without release becomes another burden. They tell themselves they shouldn't feel this way because they know better. They rationalize their pain instead of honoring it. They stay calm even when something hurts deeply. This constant regulation takes energy. There is a quiet loneliness that comes with being the emotionally stable one, the one who listens, the one who stays composed, the one who doesn't fall apart. People assume you're okay because you seem okay, and after a while, you stop correcting them. Emotional exhaustion also changes how time feels. The future feels heavy not because it's bad, but because it requires energy you're not sure you have. Even positive plans feel like obligations. Even good things feel like effort. This creates a subtle sense of dread, not about specific events, but about continuation. How long can I keep this up? That question hums beneath daily life. Emotionally. Exhausted adults often feel shame about this. They believe they should be grateful, that others have it worse, that they're lucky compared to many. Gratitude becomes another way to silence themselves. But gratitude cannot replace emotional truth. Both can exist, but one cannot cancel out the other. Another overlooked truth is that emotional exhaustion is often tied to identity transitions. Becoming an adult means taking on roles that require emotional labor, professional roles, family roles, social roles, the role of being reliable. When these roles pile up without enough support or acknowledgement, exhaustion follows. Many emotionally exhausted adults feel like they disappeared somewhere along the way. Not suddenly, but gradually. Their preferences softened, their passions dimmed, their voice quieted. They didn't choose this consciously, it happened through adaptation. They adapted to expectations, they adapted to demands, they adapted to survival. And adaptation, while useful, is not the same as fulfillment. One of the hardest things for emotionally exhausted adults is admitting they need something different, not better, not more successful, just different. Different pacing, different boundaries, different expectations of themselves. But changing patterns feels risky. Familiar exhaustion feels safer than unfamiliar rest. Rest requires facing emotions that were postponed. It requires slowing down enough to feel what was ignored. And that can feel overwhelming. So many emotionally exhausted adults stay busy not because they love being busy, but because busyness keeps the deeper feelings at a distance. When things slow down, emotions surface. Disappointment, anger, grief, longing. Not all at once, but enough to feel uncomfortable. This is where compassion becomes essential. Emotional exhaustion is not a personal failure, it is a system response. A response to prolonged emotional demand without adequate recovery. The body and mind are doing their best to cope. Healing does not begin with drastic change. It begins with small permission. Permission to rest without earning it. Permission to feel without fixing. Permission to say no without explaining. For emotionally exhausted adults, this feels unnatural at first. It may even feel wrong. Guilt often appears immediately. But guilt is not a sign of wrongdoing. It's often a sign of old conditioning being challenged. Another important shift is learning to differentiate between responsibility and over-responsibility. Emotionally exhausted adults tend to take on emotional ownership for things that are not theirs to carry. Other people's moods, other people's reactions, other people's comfort. Letting go of this feels selfish at first, but it's actually necessary. You cannot regulate everyone else and still have energy left for yourself. Learning where you end and others begin is not cold. It is healthy.